Well, let's go back to that conversation now with Dr. Nic Spaull about the number of people who are left without jobs. So the first wave of the survey was during the hard lockdown, second wave up until June. Dr. Spaull, good evening to you again. The first wave of your research showed how many jobs had been lost. It was around 2.8 million jobs. How many of those jobs returned? How many people were back at work in June?
Hi, Stephen. Thanks for having me. The problem there is that none of those jobs that we saw lost between February and April seem to have come back by June. So the job losses have persisted from level 5 to level 3 and might have wiped out a decade's worth of job growth.
It's an incredible statement to make. In other words, we'd had around 2 million jobs being added over a decade. All of those jobs have gone.
Well, so if the jobs come back under level 1, so it's possible that we were only measuring up to June, and that by August, September, October, November, maybe some of those jobs do end up coming back. But the early indications are that the move from level 5 to level 3, none of those jobs were added. However, some furloughed workers did come back to work.
You told us before, and I'll never forget the conversations you had where you told us how so many people were hungry, so many parents weren't eating enough food to make sure that their children had enough food. What's the situation now?
So that was one of the good pieces of news that emerged from the research, is that hunger does seem to have come down by about a quarter between April and June. Primarily due to the new grants and the top-up grants that seem to be easing the burden of income loss as a result of the pandemic. However, rates of hunger are still at least twice as high as they were pre-COVID.
So what rate are we looking at? Do we know how many people roughly in our country are still going to bed at night hungry?
Yes, we do. So one of the things that we can see is not just how many people are going hungry, but also how many people have run out of food. I've got the exact number right here. If we're calculating this only for children, we can see, we can basically see that there's still about 1 in 5, depending on which category that you're looking at, are going to bed hungry. But that has come down, and we are still seeing those same rates of shielding of parents of their children.
It's an incredible figure. I mean, that's 20%. One of the big issues, I mean, you talk about social grants, they were expanded. Did that intervention work? Do you think that was, I mean, I think the phrase that researchers often use is well targeted. Did it work?
So the COVID-19 grant, we do see it to be well targeted. The recipients of it are much more likely to be poor. And we see almost no one from the wealthiest 10% receiving it. So yes, we do consider it to be well targeted, and it's actually quite remarkable that the government has managed to expand the grant system by 4 million recipients, and to do that in a lockdown situation where you can't physically verify who those recipients are. It was all done electronically and digitally. So to add 4 million recipients in the space of 4 months, I mean, that's the same amount of grant recipients that we added in the last 10 years. So again, it's almost like a decade that's happened in 4 months.
Do you think we should keep these interventions in place? I mean, there's going to be pressure. I imagine the finance minister is going to be scratching his head saying, look, we can't keep this up. There are going to be other people who are going to say, well, look at the difference that it's made in terms of reducing hunger. Do you think these social grants, the expansion, the intervention should remain?
Most definitely. So, I mean, in terms of that, what you mentioned earlier about not having money to buy food, we see that that's only come down to 37%. So still, in the month of June, 37% of households reported that they had run out of money to buy food. 16% went hungry, and 11% of children went hungry. Now, if we remove the top-ups to the grants and that new COVID-19 grant, we're likely to see those rates go up again. And I think that's going to prompt political and social problems, not to mention the humanitarian issues around people going hungry. So I really think that it's not feasible to end those grants, even if we don't have the money to pay for it.
And Dr. Spaull, I mean, we are the most unequal country in the world, as racialized as well, of course. I presume that the pandemic has increased that inequality.
Most definitely. So one of the things, most disconcerting things that we see is that job losses that are persisting seem to be largest for most disadvantaged groups. So if we compare job losses between February and June, for example, manual laborers and the poorest 50%, nearly 1 in 3 have lost their jobs between February and June, compared to 3% for the richest 25% of people and 7% for professionals. So job losses have clearly been concentrated amongst the poor, those with less education, women, and those in rural areas. So yes, it is exacerbating all of our existing inequalities.